No, we will not be just 90 minutes tonight. I'll try to do it as fast as I can, but it was gruesome. It was all the while I'm making notes, I'm cutting more and more and more information till at the end
We'll come back next week.
Yeah, but I've got too many responsibilities. I got probably 3 counseling sessions a night every night next week. Even Friday night. Yeah. All right, we're finishing up the last of the Mabinogi. And last time we did about the first third of math, and this time we have the last 2/3. Now, all of the Mabinogi are not modular stories in themselves. They are all considered to be pastiches of all kinds of Celtic mythology, especially math, because there are so many different things that we're going to go through very widely divergent kinds of symbols in the last half of this story. If you remember last time, the two boys, Gwydion and Olwethi, were punished for starting a war and for raping Math's footholder just to satisfy a lust. Gwydion wasn't involved in the sexuality himself, but he did it for the love of his brother. And everything changes really quickly. If you remember, we ended up last time after the 3 years of exile as first a stag and then stag and hind and boar and sow and wolf and male and female wolves. After they had gone through those 3 years in those 3 forms, Matt figured they had learned enough. He turned them back into their normal human forms, and he says, go get yourselves cleaned up. And as soon as they come back, Matt says, tell me, which one of the virgin maidens of Gwynedd should I choose for my footholder? Now this is an indication of really great maturity on the part of Matt. In all of the stories I've ever encountered, Matt is probably one of the most mature people I've ever encountered. Because what happens is he doesn't dwell on the past. And he isn't insecure that his punishment has been too much or too little. He is confident that what he has done is right, and he just goes on to new things. You've paid your debt, now let's go on. Gwydion always has an answer. And when Matt asks this question, he says, why not my sister Erenhad? Though in some versions she's called Arianhad. She would be the person. So Matt sends for her, and she has her audience with him, and the first question he asks is she a virgin? She's a little bit circumspect in her answer, and she says she doesn't know, but that she is. Not a direct yes, but a yes in appearance. And Matt is not about to be fooled by all of this or just taking her word on it. And what he does is he gets out his little wand, and he takes it and he puts it down, and he tells her to step over it. And the moment she steps over it, this little yellow-haired boy drops out of her. And Matt looks at him. He's used to this already after all of those other things. He looks at the boy and he says, baptize him as Dylan, son of Tan, which means seaborn under the waves. And they have him baptized. And the first thing that happens is he crawls off to the sea and he dives into the sea, never to be seen again until his death. His death takes place years later, when he appears to his mother, Erenhad, and she hates him, and she misleads him and tells him to go to Govanen, who is another brother of Gilfoithi and Widian, and the setup is such, though, that Govanen thinks that he's an enemy of some type, and he slays him immediately. So he dives in the water, and he's not seen until the time of his death. Now, when we think about this, virginity seems to be a very unambiguous matter. Either one has been sexual or one has not been sexual. But we're dealing with mythology not with the ways of the world. We're dealing with it as allegory, and we're dealing with it as spiritual language. In terms of the mysteries, an action or a deed, how something is done or why something is done has more to do with its cleanliness, its purity, its virginity, than if it is done. That is, a deed, almost any deed, can be done cleanly or can be done purely. From the viewpoint of the mysteries, a couple can coalesce and remain virgin. Virgin from personal passion and the gratification of self or the pampering of ego or anything like that. One can be very pure. This is in the mysteries east and west. The reason a virgin was chosen in the first place was because her desire body, and hence her vital body, were pure of the taint of selfish indulgence. And this almost assumes that any time one partakes of what can be a very pleasurable act, like sex, that one is almost assumed to no longer be virgin. Now, the primary purpose of desire and of our desire body in evolution, and especially at our stage of evolution, is to provide motivation. Motivation to do things, and when things are done, new experience is reaped. So it would be counter to divine intent to not utilize a vehicle that has been designed to motivate us. So it is utterly wrong to try and kill out desire in ourselves. It has a purpose, and we should fulfill that purpose. However, it is equally our task to purify our desire from selfishness, from the need to gratify ourselves pleasurably. If the experience of reality done for its own sake or done with love is not enough for us, selfish desire isn't going to make it any better for us. So it is possible then to experience desire without taint. This is a little hard to take, and I myself do have questions about it, but apparently it is possible that any deed, including killing, can be done without desire, without personal desire, without hate, without enmity, and so it can remain a virgin act. At this point, for me, the jury is still out on that. I suppose that it's possible. I'll be that open, but it's a difficult one for me. Now, apparently, with Erenhad, she probably hasn't had sex. She certainly wouldn't try to lie to Matt. because she knew here a man who can hear every whisper in the country and can hear every thought that is thought in the country through the reflecting ether. You wouldn't try to lie to somebody like that. There's no way in the world you could get away with it. But apparently, even though she hasn't had sex, she's probably not a virgin, which is the other side of the coin. Meaning to say, you can be virgin from certain kinds of experience, but still have lusted after them and still have desired them in an impure way. And her answer is much too long. It sounds like the equivocation of myself when I'm guilty. Especially when I say, I'm over that, or I'm beyond that. As soon as I make a statement like that, it's just announcing to the universe that I'm going to be tried and I'm going to fall flat on my face. Our lives stand for themselves. We don't have to blow a trumpet about what we do or what we don't do, because the deed or the not doing stands for itself. There is a statement that goes in the mysteries that says that those who are possessors are not professors, but those who are professors are not possessors, talking about spiritual powers. So it would probably, if Erin was really true to herself, she probably would have given either a simple yes or said something, try me. Circumspection is replaced with simplicity the further we get along in the spiritual life. Right after Dylan was born into this world, Erin also dropped another formless little blob. I don't think that the Welsh believed in superfetation, that is, producing one litter after another, but something dropped out of her. Whittian scoops it up, and he wraps it in silk, and he puts it in a chest at the foot of his bed. According to some versions of the story, at regular times he chants over it and he sings magical incantations to it. In any case, after a certain time, Whittian wakes up one morning to the sound of a crying baby boy in the chest at the foot of his bed. And so he takes the boy, secretly wraps it up and takes it to a wet nurse and keeps its existence totally a secret to everyone. And the boy is true royalty, because by the time he's 1 year, he's as big as a 2-year-old, and by the time he is 4, he's as big as an 8-year-old. And when he's an 8-year-old, when he's a 4-year-old that looks like an 8-year-old, he walks on his own power with Whittian to the court, introduced to Matt. This brings us back to another theme that we have looked at over the course of the last 8 years several times, and that is the story of the boy in the ark. The first time we saw it in the story of Perseus and Danae when they were sealed in an ark and set out to sea. We also saw it with Osiris, who was locked into an ark and dismembered and later resurrected. We could have looked at it in the story of Moses being left in a little ark, and then his life is bookended by arks. He was placed in one ark at the beginning of his life, and toward the end of his life he had the Ark of the Covenant, which contained all of the instruments that represented the threefold Spirit. Only this story really brings in a different twist, it brings in an element that could be called exogenous embryology, meaning to say an embryo is developed outside of the womb. And now, while it makes for a really fantastic story, it's a myth of a very advanced spiritual knowledge. So far, nobody has reported back to me. Several years ago, I said somebody in the class ought to study the evolutionary tree as it exists now in taxonomy. And I suggested that it be followed through the different kinds of creation or procreation, beginning with a single cell splitting and then proceeding to where eggs are externalized and that they're fertilized externally, and passing on to the stage of evolution where they're fertilized internally but developed externally, and finally to the mammalian stage where the procreation, the fertilization takes place internally and the development takes place internally. I'm going to keep suggesting it because I may not ever get to make this study. Because if one would look at the evolutionary chart and see what other organs and what other capabilities appear in terms of evolution at the same time that there are changes in the creation, one would have an idea of the evolution of creative consciousness. Because we're part of the same evolution. It's the same spirit that is manifesting through the different kingdoms and through the different species, and it would suggest to us a path that we will naturally follow, but without immediate guidelines in our own awakening of our divine spiritual creativity. Because what we bring out of ourselves has been what has been built into us, and what has been a biological function necessary for continuance becomes a spiritual function of creativity, whereby we rise out of a creature state and into a divine state. So I'd really like to see the results of that kind of study, but I guess I'm not going to see it from this class. I never know. When we've looked at this theme before, we've always seen that the period in the ark, whether it's the ark of Perseus or the ark of Noah, that the time in the ark is a period of incubation of new developments and a transition into new conditions. And it's usually associated with the number 40 in some way. But that's a common thing. We know that it is the same process that takes place in alchemy, which is called alchemical sealing, hermetic sealing. When we know that we have all of the ingredients of a complete microcosmic being within us, then we seal ourselves out from the need to take in anything new, to try to add on to ourselves from without, and we respond to divine inward promptings, and we turn the base metals of ourselves into something spiritual. It's a transmutation process, and it is a inward process. Now, strange as it might seem, the boy in the ark, in this case, can almost be taken literally. As strange as the story is, it is literal. For example, in the Bible, Christ Jesus says of John the Baptizer, he says, "Of those born of women, there is none purer than he," referring to John. The way that is stated, of those born of women, leaves the door open for someone being born in a different manner. In all societies, in all times, there has always been the conception of the word-born individual. We know this from the deepest meditations of all mystery schools, that the individuality, the selfhood, is born out of the Word. And it is awakened out of the Word, and it is perpetually rejuvenated out of the Word. The Greeks called it the Logos, or the Nous, and in Western Christianity we call it the Life Spirit. We're looking at the Mabinogi as stories of regeneration. And we can see something like that suggested in initiation here. But it goes much beyond the birth of the individuality. When a human being, through the process of initiation, has succeeded in passing through all of the stages that humans will pass through even into the future and still be humans, they graduate into the greater mysteries. And when they get into the greater mysteries, they are known as adepts or adepti. And they have very powerful consciousness. Among the things that are learned in the greater mysteries that bring one ultimately to the capacity to become a god, to take the stuff of cosmic root substance and bring it all the way through the mineral, plant, animal, and human stages so it can think for itself. But among the things learned is something that could roughly be called an exogenous creative cloning by the word of power. Such an individual, from all of the experience gained in past and present bodies, creates a very highly perfected thought form, an archetype for a new and better and different body. When that archetype is created, a little bit of plasma is taken from the present body, and it is talked to. And by the word of power, the etheric energy and the desire nature and substance is built into this new plasma, and a new body is built, a perfected body. It isn't exactly cloning because there are improvements that are made, and if you're that far along in magical development, you can certainly do something to change the genetic code. And when this new body is perfected, one can step out of the old and into the new, and it is a body produced by the most virgin of all states. There has been no personal pleasure involved in it, so it's a word-born body. Something like this is what is hinted at or intimated at in the story of the boy being born at the foot of Whittion's bed. There is something else that is represented because the boy represents a regenerate human being. In the story, the plasma comes from Ehrenhad. And in the sense that we're looking at it, which is not the only valid sense, Ehrenhad represents the natural material side of things. It's almost like saying that even without sex, she wasn't virgin. It's like saying that there's something about matter itself that doesn't, or like chemical matter or the stuff of the world, that even to touch it is to not be virgin. Whittian, on the other hand, represents the regenerative force of spirit. So we have the pole of spirit and matter represented in the two adversaries, Ehrenhard and Whittian. So what is taking place in the struggle between them is a spiritualization of matter, a transformation of the unknown into the known as matter is spiritualized. This is where the dream is realized, and what is regenerated is the child. Hey, we're going along real fast. It still won't be under 90 minutes. So we have a little bit of an idea of what's going on. So one day, Whittian goes out walking. The boy who loves him, as he loves it, goes walking with him. And Whittian goes to care Ehrenhard, where Ehrenhard lives with her 8 sisters. No wonder the Welsh took on Catholicism so easily. Love those big families. But at any rate, Ehrenhard sees them approach, and she asks Whittian, "Who is this boy?" And Whittian says, "Your son." And he tactfully and humbly omits, "and mine." And she wants to know immediately why he disgraced her before Uncle Matt, and why he continues to disgrace her by bringing these unsightly remembrances to her. And Whittian tells the truth. He says, "Such a fine boy can never be a disgrace." And so she says, "What's his name?" And Whittian says, "God knows. He has none yet." And then Ehrenhard knows she's got him right there. She then swears an oath that he shall have no name unless he has one by me. So this, brothers and sisters can really get to each other. So Whittian says angrily, you're a wicked woman. You're never going to be called a virgin again, and the boy is going to have a name. He's that determined. For lack of time, we're already at the cutting stage. We will omit the reason why all of this occurs when he's 4 years old or in his 4th year. You can get ideas about that by studying esoteric cosmology, if you like, and applying it to life cycles in a given life. But there is a reason why it would occur at that time. Instead, we'll look at things in a more general way and look at things that are more germane to our general topic. The Spirit, the unity, in its manifestation, has 3 attributes. And each of the 3 attributes can be seen as part of the character of verbalization. The first attribute, associated with the divine spirit, focused in the person of a being called the Father, is invisible, almost arbitrary meaning. Its meaning by itself alone. It's so dense with pure meaning, it is unfathomable in itself. The second attribute, which relates to the life spirit, And the being that is, or focused through the being that is called the sun, among other things in the West, is expressed as the Word. It is the vehicle of expression for the meaning behind it. The intent of the meaning behind it is perpetually expressed through the Word. The third attribute, which is associated with the human spirit and is focused in the self, in the macrocosmic self, in the person of the human spirit, or the being itself by the name God, or our individual self. The individuality is a particularized word. And that particularized word is a name. It's something ostensive. You can point to this individual and say, this is so-and-so. What the myth is implying is that this perfecting, or this regenerate being that is the boy, has not been regenerated so far as to have yet been born in the spirit as an individuality. He has not been named. The naming is what we're trying to get at. Matter is that part of the unknown in the absolute as congealed by the will of the knowing or by the known. The knowing, the spirit, projects a dream into the unknown, and the part that is unknown, that is not fathomed, is congealed as various grades of matter. And the more deep the unknowing, the more dense the matter, the more gross, the more fundamental, and the more resistant. And the dream that is projected into it becomes realized by the interaction of spirit through the dream into the ignorance or into the unknown. And its virtue is resistance, because the resistance is what causes the struggle. And the struggle is what causes us to give ourselves to it and to realize it. Now, the truth that is projected, spiritual principles that are projected from the spirit into the unknown, exist in something like a somnambulistic or sleeping state right in matter. They're known as instinct. Not intuition, but instinct. And at very best, they're known as laws of nature, or the unconscious consciousness of nature. The laws of nature, or the instincts of nature, in their resistance to the spirit, are sometimes stated in spiritual scripture as curses, because they're resisting the intent, but that's their function. They're resisting the creative intent of spirit, and therefore the proclamation of what's coming back to you that you've already projected into it is seen as a curse. So the curse of Arianhad as saying that the boy will never have a name is really the statement of a law of nature. So the question then becomes, what does the curse of Ehrenhard mean? Obviously, what the Spirit knows, it knows. And that's old hat. And that would be boring. It would be like a very bright child that has nothing to challenge it. It gets bored really easily. And the dream, if it remains merely a dream, it's like a daydream. It's like a fantasy. And it's a perfect reflection of what the Spirit wants to have happen. But when the resistance of meeting something unknown is involved, then the Spirit has to give of itself. And it has to give all of itself. In that case, when the unknown is seen as in the dream through perception, the things, even the laws of nature, have an illusionary character. They seem foreign to us. And we in our spiritual consciousness always feel like pilgrims or strangers or foreigners going through a land that we don't know. But because they're unknown, they're new. They're different to us. The future is not in the Spirit. The future is in the past. It is in matter. Because that's where the newness comes that becomes known in the Spirit. And that is the great beauty of matter. So, the Spirit, the self, spiritual ego, whatever name you want to call it, is born and it is sustained by the Word. And in one respect, our name, in all mystery schools, our name is the name of God. And by the process of initiation, as we awaken fully to each of the 7 principles in ourselves, that is represented as learning one more syllable of our name. And when we know all 7 syllables, we know the name of God and we know the name of ourselves. But scriptures of various types are clear about the matter that we're given a new name. Not a name that was known before, but it is a new name. And this means that the novelty, the difference, the unknown of matter produces something new in each of the 7 states. Thus, even though the dream is known and the dreamer is known, when the dream becomes realized, there's something new. And it takes on a whole new flavor, and the divine becomes something different as a consequence of this interaction. And so, the initiation into the reality of the world is something that gives us a new name. And so this is what it means when it says only Ehrenhard can give a name to the boy, because Ehrenhard, as we're looking at it, represents the material world where things are greatly new and where things are resistant, and that's where our new name comes from. So we become what we do, and we're forced to do new things, and so we become new beings. So the curse of Ehrenhard really isn't a curse. It makes for everything to be new and different. Whittian, at this point, has a great challenge. We're already on page 4 of the notes. Unbelievable. And the notes get sparser as we go all the way through. I should hold. We haven't even turned over one tape yet. So Whittian has to wrest a name out of Ehrenhard that the new regenerate boy has to be a specific being. So the next day he goes walking. The boy goes walking with him. And when he comes to the seashore, he finds red seaweed. And he conjures the red seaweed and he turns it into a ship. And he sees some kelp laying there, and he conjures that into fine cordovan leather. And so they enter the ship, and they're floating out on the sea, and they're cutting up the leather, and they're making shoes. And about the time that they approach Cair Ehrenhard, this time from the sea, they're gilding the leather and making magnificent shoes, as we saw in the earlier, in the story, oh my goodness, I won't go back to that. In the earlier story. And so, when Ehrenhard sees the ship at sea, she's curious, and she sends messengers out to see who it is. And they come back to her, and they tell her there are shoemakers on this ship, and they're making remarkable shoes with great skill. So Ehrenhard has her foot measured, and she sends out and asks for a pair of shoes. And Whittian makes her a pair of shoes, only intentionally he makes it too big. Sends it back to her, and she says, "This will not do, these are too big," and she sends it back. So he makes her another pair of shoes, and he intentionally makes this one too small. And he sends it out to her, and they don't fit at all, and she says, "No, I can't take these either," and sends them back. And finally, he feigns indignation and says, "I will only make a pair of shoes for this person if I have the foot right there to measure by." And she has seen the beautiful shoes, and she wants a pair, so she goes out to the ship. And so Whittian starts making shoes for her. And as he's doing so, a wren comes and lands on the side of the ship. And the boy reaches down and picks up something and throws at it, and he hits it right where the sinew of the leg meets the bone and knocks it off the ship. And Ehrenhard says, "By God, the fair-haired lad is a skillful hand." That's her demise right there. At this, Whittian says, "The curse of God on you. The lad now has a name." And he names him Lou skillful hand, or Lou with the light hair with the skillful hand, the whole name being Lou Law Giffey's. By the way, wrens were considered to the Druids to be the king of all the birds, because they rode on the eagle's back, and that they could fly as high as an eagle, and they didn't have to work. And the Welsh had a great appreciation for, just like Bertrand Russell, for the life of leisure, all those wonderful things you can do when you have a lot of leisure. And they also considered that wrens were a guard against all forms of witchcraft. So the statement is, both when a wren lands and gets knocked off, it's a proclamation of himself as a king, and it's a sort of a defiance of her magic and of her curse. Lou means skillful hands. Oh. Yeah, he doesn't give the name. Ehrenhard gave it. She said, "By God, that is a skillful lad. And that was the defining of his name. And he was then called Lu Laws Githis, that is the fair-haired one with the skillful hand. All right. And Aaronhad at this point says, you'll do no better for hurting me, and Gwydion says, I haven't hurt you. I've just given your son a name. And she's even more angry at this point. She proclaims, this boy shall have no weapons until I give them to him, or until I arm him. And Gwydion again takes the challenge, and he says, and this isn't just an idiom. He's saying, by me and God, this springs from your wickedness, but Lu shall have arms. Going back to the story of Pwyll, we noted in that story that Pwyll overcame and slew Havgin with one stroke. And we saw at that time that that stroke represented which should throw panic into everyone's heart. We said that in the material world with its greatest limitation, we learned the most discrete objectivity, because we see things in the simplest way. The external world is opaque. And in that opacity, we see only one point of view at a time. And from that one point of view, we see a singular objectivity. But even so, the obtaining of objectivity is not an easy matter. The material world, because it is unknown, and the dream being so distant from the dreamer, the creative spirit, has the dense physical world be very filled with illusions. And a lot of those illusions are a matter of perspective and proportion. If we look at a piece of silk as the embryo of Lu was born in, it looks smooth and shiny. But if we look at it under a magnifying glass, it looks like there are all sorts of snags in it. The Himalayas look like huge mountains, and the Mariana Deep as a great gouge. But if we take them relative to the surface of the whole Earth, the Earth is smoother than a ball bearing. So there's a matter of perspective and proportion about the material world, that we're always passing from one state of illusion to another. An infant in a cradle will reach for a light bulb across the room. And it's no better than we as adults who think we know something just because we recognize it and we're familiar with it, when we really know it not at all. So the objectivity that we gain in and of and about the material world is not an easy matter. Even when we systematically try to obtain that objectivity by the application of science, it's still not easy. But strangely enough, the method that science uses to obtain objectivity is the same measure that Gwydion uses to lure Aaronhad to the ship. That is, in our indirect sensory apparatus, we get only an approximation. In order to come to objective knowledge out of illusion, we have to work very hard. For example, we overestimate something. and then we underestimate something. And gradually, by diminishing the tolerance, we find out the approximation to very high degree of accuracy, almost certainty, to the point where we can take the stuff of matter and create with it and produce illusions and objects in matter of great perfection and of great significance. So what Whittian is doing is the same thing that we're doing with science. We get closer and closer and closer. Because we can never, if the unknown is a manifestation of part of the absolute, we can never really know the absolute. And therefore, in the material world, things must always have a certain element of being unknown. And that's just exactly what happens. So, the name, the struggle that Whittian has for getting the name out of Ehrenhard represents the process of repeatedly working closer and closer and closer to the truth until we have the flavor of it, and in each struggle trying to make something of it, a little bit more of the soul essence is taken out, and there is more character to the name, there is more flavor to the name. So, Whittian and Lu return to a place called Dinas Dinlu, which means the fort of Lu. And this is where Whittian is educating him in statecraft and the laws of nature and magic and everything else. And he notices that when Lu is of full stature, probably large, but he notices that he's not quite in the shape that he should be. He's suffering because he's idle. He doesn't exercise with arms. So he's not as he should be. So one day, Whittian takes Lu, and they go on horseback. And they go to Care Ehrenhard again. Only this time, Whittian has camouflaged them, or what's the right word? When you take on personal camouflage, what's the word? My goodness, my memory's in terrible shape here. Disguise. Yeah. So they're both disguised as young, very young bards, poets. They come to the castle, and they meet the gatekeeper, and the gatekeeper is always Saturn. Saturn tests you on everything. You don't get through anything without destiny being there. And they tell them that they are bards from Morganwig. Morgan is sort of the universal feminine goddess human of all the Celts. All of these groups of nines of women, they formed themselves into covens of 9, and they studied holy things and very practical magic. They were all named after Morgan. So this is sort of like a universal passkey. It'll get you in any door if you say that you're from the headquarters, where the castle of castles is. Ehrenhard, at this point, being fetched with the number 9, still hasn't learned that the number 2 is the number of division and the number of trouble and of struggle. And when she sees the 2, she invites him in. She's just, she's got to learn to count better than that. And that evening, the 9 sisters celebrate with the bards. The 9, obviously, is a number of enneatic completion without going to a new octave, that is, to a new number 10. And usually, all of the 9s sing the word, whether they be sirens or whether they be Celtic nuns. or whether they be the Valkyries, like the planets singing things into existence. So they represent completing things. They usually lived on islands all by themselves, and they wrought great magic, and kings and everyone else had to come to them for their blessing. So Gwydion and Lugh come, only they're dressed as bards, and they start telling stories. And Gwydion, again, is great at storytelling, and by now Lugh has some of the art, and they're treated royally. And eventually the night's entertainment ends, and they're given a cell together. Only when Lugh goes to sleep, Gwydion does not. And he begins conjuring and chanting. And after a while, as it's getting toward morning, the alarm is sounded. For outside the castle on the sea, there is an armada that is so dense that you can't even see the water. At this point, Erenhad panics, and she comes to Gwydion and says, "Will you take care of our defense?" She says, "I know magic, but I know nothing of..." Yeah, well, but she thought he was she comes to him as thinking he's a young bard. And she says, "Will you take care of our defense?" He says, "I only know magic. I don't know anything about the arms at all." And Gwydion says, "Certainly." He says, he starts shouting out commands, and as one of his first commands, he tells her, "Arm this young man here." And he arms himself, and when he's done, and he looks over and sees that she's finished, and he asks her, he gets confirmation from her. He's a clever guy, and he says, "Is the armament of him completed?" And she says, "Yes." And he says, "Well, then we'll disarm." And Erenhad panics, and she says, "Why?" And Gwydion then dissolves the illusion, and there's no more armada outside, and it's just himself and Lugh standing down in the cell with her. And Erenhad again curses him as evil. And she takes the responsibility line. The material side always takes the responsibility line. She says, "Just think how many people could have been injured or even killed in this preparation for battle. In this kind of panic, people get hurt." And she ends up her spiel by pronouncing that Lugh will not have a wife of any race on this earth. And Gwydion again replies, and he says, "You're evil." He's sort of stuck on that theme. And he says, "Lugh shall have a wife." See, when there's polarization, you always see the opposite side as evil. This is the way struggle takes place. That's why we've looked at all of that polarization over the years. Especially if one identifies oneself with spirit, then that which is resisting spirit, if one takes it personally, is seen as evil. It's seen as darkness. And so all the schools of dualism that saw the spirit as the masculine creative force, unfortunately saw matter as feminine and receptive and passive and evil. In the process of regeneration, when we pass from creatures through the hesitant state somewhere in between that we call human, to the state of becoming angel-like demigods, we need much more than flavor. When we struggle with the congealed dream, the congealed ignorance, what happens is the matter is really spiritualized. In the struggle, it is like alchemical compounding. Things are broken down to their very simplest nature. They're powdered, they're distilled, and the essence is taken out of them and it passes into the spirit. And when it passes into the spirit and becomes known, it's more than just new flavor. It is something that helps the spirit to grow. Because with expanding consciousness, spirit is perpetually growing. It's not just unfolding its potentialities. The potentialities of this new regenerate being called Lu are not just being unfolded, they're growing. Not only is it a matter of growth, but it comes into spiritual, creative capabilities. And the essence that is taken out of our experience becomes soul powers. Powers that allow us to become creative beings, not just perceptive beings, not just idle watchers or witnesses. We become creative beings. So we're created in the image of God, and so we become powers like that. Christ says it, the things that I do, ye shall do also, and greater. So what we're seeing here, along the way we're looking at this story, is that in the taking of arms, the spiritual potential for creativity, for magic, for doing things is empowered. And that empowerment through soul material is called the armament, that he is becoming armed. I have so many notes here. I'm having trouble holding it all together. At first, when we look at the story and try to see it in a spiritual light with regard to regeneration, it seems far-fetched that Whittian has to do so much magic. And there has to be so much illusion involved. But if we think about it, it's really quite true to reality. Nature, or brute matter, is actually dumb. And it is asleep to waking consciousness. But, like Erin Hod, it responds. She falls for each trick. If we think about it, we really are like Lu. We're ignorant of what's going on. In our own armament, every day, we're going through experiences. And each one of those experiences is arming us. So that even within the course of one life, and even with our, how would you say it, minuscule efforts, we can look back and say, hey, we're growing, and I'm empowered, and I can do things that I could never do before. And we don't, almost all people in the world are like Lu. They're innocent sleepwalkers. They're being carried through this process of regeneration, and they don't even know it's happening. It's all like a magical thing, and suddenly we awaken fully to something and say, oh my God, that was going on all the while, and I didn't know it. It's like I've been through some kind of magical dog and pony show, and I fell for it all, and it was all good for me. As in all tales of this type, the trials get harder and harder and harder. And so what happens when Whittian is faced with the thought that his son is never going to have a wife, never going to have a counterpart or somebody to love that is born of any human race, he doesn't know what to do. But he's smart enough to go to Uncle Math. And what transpires is probably one of the most beautiful vignettes of all mythology. I can't read it without getting carried away by it. First thing he does is he goes to Math and he just burdens himself of all of his complaints against Ehrenhad. See, before he can be ready to do something new, he has to cleanse himself. And in his confessing, in his retrospection, he's cleansing himself and he's preparing himself for his own new soul matter to be applied. When he's finished, Matt, just as a matter of nature, said, well, let's use our magic and conjure a wife for Lou made out of flowers. Utterly beautiful story. So they take flowers from oak trees and from broom grass and from meadowsweet, and they conjure up the most beautiful woman that has ever been seen on the world, and she matches the beauty of Lou. When they're finished with her, they call her Bloodwood. And Bloodwood means woman of flowers or flower face. At the wedding, Math gives him the cantreve of Dinading to rule. And they set up house in a place called Castle Mur. There is no doubt some herbal and magical meaning to oak bloom and meadowsweet, to which I have to confess ignorance, even though it makes me sound like Ehrenhad. There are a lot of things I don't know. In fact, there is a very famous mystery poem called Hans Bloodwood that is filled with all kinds of poetic, magical lore. This is one of the poems that Robert Graves loves to dig into and find out all of those meanings of. That in the War of the Trees. So instead of looking at recondite magical knowledge, we'll look in a much more simple and in a much more general way at it all. This is not just sweet fancy. Flowers breathe out essence. And that essence is a distillate of their being. It's what their experience is. Rudolf Steiner even mentions what a wonderful thing it is to go out into any little sylvan scene at sunset. He says at sunset, all of the energy that has been taken in from the sun into the plants and has been worked on by the plants, when the sun sets, they relax and they breathe their essence out into the world. And then the angels that surround that part of nature suck up that essence, and the pictures of the experience, whether it's a gopher digging a hole or ants fighting with each other or whatever, the experience of the alchemical process of the plants is retrospected by the angels for the divine. And so the essence of experience, even of non-wakingly conscious beings, is not lost. The flowers then breathe out their living experience, and the vegetable kingdom is the living expression of the etheric realm. It is the service of the vegetable kingdom to take the life that comes from the sun and to specialize it and then to offer it to animals and humans who can only minimally take sunlight and specialize it. They have sacrificed the ability to spiritually photosynthesize etheric energy that flows from the sun in order to be able to manifest desire. Once a being manifests desire, it sacrifices that ability. So, the magic of math and Whittian represents the next major stage of the regenerate, perfect human being that represents all of humanity. That it represents the building of the higher part of the vital body, the etheric body, that is called the soul body, which carries the intellectual or divine faculties of the vital body as opposed to the natural or biological functions. The sense perception, the ability to stir to movement, thought and memory are carried in that soul body. So the soul body is built out of experience, just like the flower experience. And again, the curse of Aaron-Had is no curse, but it's actually a spiritual fact. No being who is of the earthly can any longer be attracted to a mate that represents earthliness. It's attracted to something new or something higher. It is attracted to something in a chaste way, chaste like the plants and flowers are chaste from any desire at all. There is no possible indulgence in this. So the representation of the formation of a soul body in which one takes soul flights away from the physical is what is represented by Bladuid in this part of the story. However, the fact that one has been introduced to something higher and has even been initiated into the separate experience of soul flight doesn't necessarily mean that they aren't capable of falling. So Bladuid does revert. One day, when Lou has gone to Cairdothel to visit his great-uncle Matt, there is a presaging event indicating what is to happen. She looks out and she sees a stag being chased by hounds, and further behind it, men. And she sends her attendants out to see what's going on, and they come back and they tell her, Goranwuri, the staunch, is hunting. He's from the neighboring Cantrive, and he and his hounds have brought the stag down, and he has killed it. Presaging of what's coming, the great stag, the spiritual pure being, has been brought to earth. She is a little bit socially uncomfortable, but she realizes that she has a noblesse oblige and she has to do the gentle thing, and so she invites Goranwuri and his men to dinner. During the course of the meal, she and Goranwuri are irresistibly attracted to each other. Just by looking at each other. It's what the Buddhists would call the doctrine of the eye. The desire body controls the muscles of the eye, and I find myself ogling women that I don't really even want to ogle. But there's something about the illusion of the eye looking at the appearance rather than the inward reality. But at any rate, the attraction is so strong that they sleep together that night. And for the next few succeeding nights. Now this is not surprising, because the soul body is part of the vital body. And the main function of the vital body is to form and to grow and protect and take care of the physical. That's its duty. So it isn't surprising then that even the higher ethers of the vital body could be attracted to something very, very earthy. The dark beauty of physical existence. And once something has our eye, it captures us. And so she is attracted to something worldly and loses sense of those very quiet words that are uttered by the Spirit, and suddenly we're back down in the earth again. When this occurs, then the subconscious mind that we've talked about in the past that does all those deductive reasoning becomes cunningly the servant of earthly ends. And they plot the death of Lu so that they can be together without the inconvenience of a husband being around. Consciousness is a matter of perspective, or a change of perspective. That when we're in the body, we feel one way, and when we're out of the body, we feel a very different way. It's easy to approach someone out of the body and say things to them that you could never say to them in the body, because they would take great offense by it, because they're freed from that material thing. That's just the way it goes in the story. As soon as the approach of Lu's return is announced, the messengers come and say the master is coming back. At that moment, Gorenwei is out the door. It's like a change of perspective, and it's back to the castle being ruled by Lu again. And so they have a big celebration when he returns, and during the feast, and probably they had bards singing and all of that, Lu is enthusiastic at being home, but Bladuid is very quiet and unresponsive. And finally he asks her, "Are you all right?" And she says, "In your absence, I became concerned about your death." She didn't lie. She told the truth. Everything spiritual has to tell the truth, but she told it in such a way that it represented something else. He says, "God, thank you for your concern, but it would be very hard to kill me." And she says, "Tell me how. My memory is better than yours," which is also true, because the memory that's in the brain is nothing compared to the memory that's in the etheric body. That's photographic memory. So she tells the truth again. And Lu, being pure and spiritually forthright, tells her everything. He says, "The only thing that can kill me is a spear that has taken a year to make, because you can only make it 1 hour a week on Sunday when the Mass is being said." And then he says, "I cannot be killed indoors, and I cannot be killed outdoors. And I can't be killed on a horse, and I can't be killed on foot." And she is flabbergasted by that, but she uses that at least as a ruse to find out even more. And she says, "How is that possible?" And he says, "The only way that I can be killed is if you would make a bath for me on a river bank and have it under a thatched roof, so I would really not be either inside or outside. And then you would have a goat next to the bathtub, and when I got out of the bath and had 1 foot on the tub and 1 foot on the goat, I would be vulnerable. And I would be vulnerable even unto death. It sounds very, very strange, but it really isn't, especially if you know the Druids. The Druids had the most magical religion of any spiritual body in the history of post-Atlantean people. And the Druids set up impossibly complex and difficult conditions for everything in their life. To facilitate anything, it was an amazingly complex thing. See, when you pass from the unity of spirit into manifest expression through various planes, things become more and more complex and more diverse, and there are more ramifications and conditions. Thus, to accomplish something magically or to accomplish a change in this stuff, in the physical plane, it means an enormous amount of knowledge and an enormous amount of concentration to be able to focus the energy down, right down to the atomic level. So that meant not only knowledge and concentration, but it meant that they had to pay attention to all of those details and maintain intensity. So what the Druids did is they designed their whole life like that. Their whole life was complex conditions so that they were always exercising their consciousness to be functioning in that way. And so they were magicians all the time. But the conditions of Lu are not absurd, and they're not unreasonable. Now, personally, I doubt the condition of the spear having to be made only during the time when Mass was being said. The reason I doubt that is because this is obviously a pre-Christian myth, and it has elements of Christianity in it just to satisfy the very Orthodox Christians that might have raised their hackles otherwise. But there's no doubt about the principle. All magic amulets, all compounding of soul material is done at specific cosmic times. And one need not study any magic at all, or very little at all. All you have to do is read a little bit of Paracelsus or Cornelius Agrippa or somebody like that, and you'll find out that they do everything that way. Only when the cosmos is ripe can certain things be accomplished. So if you're trying to penetrate to someone's vital core, to the heart of their being, it's not surprising that it would be done on Sunday, because sun represents the heart of our being. And that would probably be done on a sun hour or a Mars hour or something like that. That's not surprising at all. The conditions of neither indoors nor outdoors, that seems to be a matter of consciousness. When we're in our body looking outward, we have a very subjective consciousness. But we look out for ourselves, and we look out relative to our own particular needs. On the other hand, if we're looking at a television, or if we're in a football stadium, and we're on the outside looking in, we have an objective consciousness. And we can judge the game perhaps better than the participants who are too subjective in it. We can all be excellent grandstand quarterbacks. So there is a great value to the internal consciousness looking out and the external consciousness looking in. But right now our consciousness is limited, and we can only have one of these two states at the same time. If we're looking out for ourselves, we're not vulnerable. Or if we've got the big overview looking in, we're not vulnerable. But it's when we're shifting between one stage or the other stage of consciousness that we're vulnerable. And this is why Lu, representing the regenerate or beginning to be regenerate consciousness, is vulnerable then. The same thing with neither being aloft or down to earth. He's either in the body or out. And it's in the moment of transition that there is danger. Now the second set of conditions about the tub and the river and the goat, that's very simply understandable when you know one fact. And that is, Whittian was the spiritual and magical father of Lu, but he was also, to the Welsh, one of the greatest all-time astrologers. So, imagine a picture like the etheric pole of the earth overcasting the earth, like being under a palm tree with the fronds hanging out. And that's sort of what the pavilion is like. There were no doubt birds flying in and out under the thatched roof. I have my Bible here. Because, it's not going to be so easy. Between Capricorn and Aquarius, if you look north towards the pole, are all the birds. There is the lyre as a diving bird, and there is the swan, and there is the hawk or eagle, and here's where the thatched hut comes. So what we're saying is that Lu was a Capricornius. Aquarius, if you look on the picture, you have to look at both hemispheres to see it all, was a man with a tub of water. And the water that runs out of the tub forms a river, which runs right back under the man, and it runs under the goat. So in this case, they're sure that it's a male goat. I don't know what that is. And it eventually runs into the mouth of the south fish. So Lu's destiny, his vulnerability, is stretched out between Capricorn and Aquarius. Capricorn is an earthy sign, and Aquarius is an etheric, electric, airy sign. Lu, on one hand, he's got 1 foot on the earth, and on the other hand, he's etheric and angelic. So he's something which in some societies is called a tweener, which means that he's in between things and both sides take shots at you, and he's vulnerable because of that. All of our earthly experience must die, and the etheric soul essence must be extracted from it and resurrected in a new human being. So the death of Lu is not necessarily a bad thing. Even while in the body, the more we put into soul activity, the more we withdraw the etheric energy from the biological functions, and the more we put into the higher ethers, into the soul body, and we suffer from ill health. We're vulnerable that way. But even that is good, because in that we bring back more of our past destiny, and in experiencing that past destiny we gain even more soul power. So even illness and death of Lu is not bad. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, who is the Lord of Death, the Reaper, and the planet of selfishness. Aquarius is ruled by Uranus, who is the Lord of perpetual life. And Uranus rules unselfish, altruistic love. Again, if we live by self-orientation, we're consistent and we're predictable. And we have a kind of manipulative security. We have almost a Machiavellian kind of existence. If we live completely by altruistic love, we are suspended and we float in peace, and we have an angelic state that approaches a Christ-like state, and we're invulnerable. But when we're in between, we are vulnerable. We're in between now. We're partly in the material world, partly in the etheric world. And we go back and forth, and we have 1,000 deaths. Every night when we die, when we sleep, we die. Every morning, when we awake, we're resurrected. We go back and forth, and at those moments of transition, we're vulnerable. We're vulnerable to the degree that we're altruistic. We're vulnerable to the hard urges of the world. The sharks will get us. So, no matter what perspective we're coming from, in this state of transition, we're vulnerable, and we can be killed, but then we're just resurrected. It's all good. Because it's easy to say that right now in the talk, but at other times it isn't so. So easy to talk about. So, as soon as Bladuid has all this information, of course she doesn't want to hear all of his explanations of it. Maybe you guys don't want to either. As soon as she has the information, she passes it Gornway. It is the function of the soul body to pass information from the spirit into the physical, and perceptive information from the physical back into the spirit. That's its nature. It's not doing anything irregular at all. Bladuid then tells Lou, she says, I'm insecure about this. And in order to really be able to protect you and help you, I would like to go through a dress rehearsal of this, so I know what to do to save you. And so she goes to Avon Gwynville, which is River Gwynville, and she starts building this open pavilion, while Goronway is meanwhile slowly building the spear. Now, amazingly, Lou is so good-natured, so Lou agrees to all of this, and he says, I'll go through this dress rehearsal for you. And so he goes to the river, and he takes the bath, and after he's finished his baptismal and he's dressing, he's got 1 foot on the bathtub and 1 foot on the buck goat, and Goronway appears with the spear from Bryn Kivogler. I don't know, that's a pretty good pronunciation. And he tosses the spear, and he pierces Lou in the side, probably the right side, and Lou screams, and his soul is seen in the form of an eagle rising away from the body, never to be seen again. Audaciously, Goronway overpowers the country that makes it his own and lives openly and unabashedly with Blodred. The Hermetic axiom is, as above, so below. What has gone before in heaven will follow after on earth. Know this and rejoice. The patterns of all of initiation and evolution are seen in the heavens. Not only in the heavens of the stars, in the star pictures, they're there certainly, but they're seen in the transcendent spiritual worlds. beyond even the world of concrete thought. There, the ideas, the creative ideas out of which the cosmos is formed, appear as a drama. And the mythical drama is continuously and perpetually reenacted. And it is always alive. And it is from those reenactments of mythical story, of the essence of creativity, that we delineate history in the phenomenal worlds. That is how all things come from that. So the ideas, because the Spirit must create, inevitably are accomplished in material manifestation. We've been looking all along at the pendulum of generation, degeneration, and regeneration, and we've been looking at brides passing back and forth, and now we're looking at how this occurs in the process of the delineation of perpetual mythic ideas into the world and out. If we look from the Capricornian perspective of Goran way, Lu is a fool. He's a dupe. You take advantage of somebody like that. If you look at it from the fixed celestial quality of Aquarius, for Lu it is a matter of principle, and it's a matter of destiny. And he can act it out with magical confidence. If you look at it altruistically from the viewpoint of Aquarius, it is an act of love. Not merely an act of love of Lu for Blodued, but a whole way of life, doing things by love. The eyes of love are not innocent. They see all of the things of the world. They can see all of the schemes and machinations that we pull on each other. But to the eyes of love, that altruistic, Christ-like love, they're just grist for the mill. They're true, they're significant, but they're not as important as love and love itself, because compared to love, they have almost an illusionary cast to them. So if we are becoming, as Lu is becoming, we're not really becoming fools, though the world might think we're becoming fools. We are becoming beings of love. And though we may have the same experiences in the world as everyone else, we try to do them with love, or we try to allow or coax the love of God to work through us to accomplish them. Matt, with his hearing that could hear every whisper, knowing what was said, when he found out about the sacrifice of love beyond cost, he was sad. But he was not as sad as Whittian, who is the magical father to Lu, and who loved him deeply and closely as only a parent can love. So Whittian sets out searching throughout all of Gwynedd, all of Poes, looking everywhere for Lu, but having no success. One day, he stops at a farmer's place, and he's asking for a place to stay. And the farmer tells him the story of a sow he has, and he says every morning when this sow is let out of the sty, it goes running off, and it comes back every night fattened. Whittian, being a magician, this intuitively strikes him, and it probably goes back to the curse of Pryderi. Remember in the early part when he kills Pryderi, as Pryderi is dying, he says, these swine will feed on your flesh. And so, he tells the farmer, Gwydion tells the farmer, tomorrow morning don't let that sow go until I am there. And so the next morning, he gets up bright and early, and they let the sow loose, and she runs upstream into a valley called Mant Lu, meaning Valley of Lu. And then it stops to feed. And when Gwydion looks at what it's feeding on, he sees that it's feeding on flesh. Rotting, maggoty, wormy flesh. And then he looks to where that flesh is coming from, and he sees on the top of the tree, he sees an eagle. And every now and then the eagle shivers, and more of its flesh falls off down to the ground, and the pig is surfeiting itself on it. The eagle at this point is just about extinguished. And so Gwydion is quick about his wits, and he sings something to the eagle to bring it down from the tree. We won't go into all the esotericism of this. He sings, an oak grows between two lakes, dark sky and glen. If I speak truly, this comes from Lu's feathers. And at that, the eagle dropped into the middle of the tree. Gwydion then sang another England. An oak grows on a high plain. Rain soaks it no more than does putrefaction. It has supported 20 crafts. In its branches is Lu's skillful hand. At that, the eagle dropped to the lowest branch of the tree, and Gwydion sang still another England. An oak grows on a slope, the refuge of a handsome prince. If I speak truly, Lu will come into my lap. At that, the eagle dropped down onto Gwydion's knee. Beautiful stuff. Much more astrology, much more lore of regeneration. We won't go into all of that poetry because there's all kinds of recondite things in there, which fortunately I can bypass and say it's because of time I have to bypass, but I have to be honest and say I don't know all of that stuff that is in there. I'm sort of a barn painter. I paint with broad strokes, and I don't know all of the refined details. Give me a ruler, But at any rate, the eagle and the swine represent Scorpio and Taurus, respectively. They also represent the extremes of the spirit-matter pole, the Prushra Prakriti pole. The eagle represents the regenerative spirit. And we learned last week when we talked about swine that they represent spiritualized matter, where cosmic wisdom is taken in and it becomes the equivalent of succulent flesh. Clearly, the eagle, even though it is the Lord of regeneration, is in our story in a degenerate state. It's wormy, maggoty, and rotting. However, as usual, the most glorious images are the most horrible images. If we think about it, the worms are thriving. The maggots are thriving. The bacteria are thriving. And the sow is thriving. They are all alive and growing. That's the way of creation and regeneration. From the spiritual view, it means sacrifice. Sacrifice of the most powerful spiritual life, everything that we have, we give up in sacrifice. The dream, the creative reflective projection in which we are blessed to participate, cannot be realized without sacrifice. We have to give up everything we have. And only when we give up everything that we have in the struggle, in the battle with the unknown, can we realize and bring to life something new. We must sacrifice right down to the description of the eagle, to the point that we're nothing but skin and bones, right down to rock bottom, right down to each last little material atom. The regeneration of Lu, when Whittian had him and transformed him back into a human, took a year. Actually, it's probably not the first nor the last regeneration. If the creation took place by many deaths into matter successively deeper and deeper, there must be many deaths out of matter and regenerations. So it happens again and again and again until everything is perfect. After a year, when Lu has fully regained his strength, he goes to Matt and he says, "It is my time to demand recompense." Matt says, the sooner the better. He knows the times are ripe. It's not an eye for an eye, but it is a completion. If we can look at destiny not as a bill to be paid, but as something to be neutralized, something to be completed and transcended, much better way to look at it. So, Lu and Whittian proceed to Dinadong together. When Goranway and Blodeved see them coming or hear of their coming, they part. It's the way of the matter to split and split and split again, right down to the atoms and subatoms if you're a materialist. And that's just the way of the world. There may even be something esoteric in this, that this may even be talking about a final stratification of the etheric body that frees it completely from the material. I don't know that. Whittian follows Blodeuwedd as she flees. She takes all of her feminine attendants and she heads for the mountain where there's a sanctuary. But her attendants keep looking back, and pretty soon they're looking back all the time, and they don't know it, and they fall off the end of the mountain and they drop into the lake. So Blodeuwedd is alone by herself, and Whittian catches her, and he tells her that for all of the shame that she has brought, her face must never see the light of day again. And she must be hated by all of her kind. And so he transforms her into an owl. And the owl can only be out at night, and all of the other birds fear and hate the owl. And the owl in Welsh to this day has the name flower face, Blodeuwedd. If you look at the owl's face, it looks just like a flower. We don't need to go into, though we could, and go into it more deeply from the experience we've had, the whole idea of Lot's wife looking back, or of Orpheus looking back, and the deathly quality that had. We don't need to go into that. In fact, we really don't even need to say much about Blodeuwedd. It is true that the vital body, or the soul body, is the vehicle of night. When our physical body sleeps, In the dark of night, the soul body flies off and does its work then, and it never gets any credit for it. And the owl, to this day, is also an animal of digestive wisdom. It dissolves and breaks everything up, so there may be something there. At the same time that Gwydion is taking care of Bradud, Lu goes after Goranwe, and he escapes to a place called Penlyn. And from there, he offers Lu not only Lu's own territory, but his own, and gold and silver and all kinds of riches. Lu says, no way. He says, I will deliver the same blow I received. Goranwe sees there's no way out of it, and he asks some of his men, or all of the men in his company, whether anybody will substitute for him. Of course, none of them will. And so he knows he has to go back to the same place that he delivered the blow. And so he goes to the bank of Avon Ginwald. At the last moment, before he is to receive the spear, he cops out. He said, I was under a woman's influence. I wasn't responsible. But could I have protection? Could I put this slab of stone in front of me? And of all things, Lu allows him to put this slab of stone in front of him. And so Lu winds up with the spear, and he pierces the stone. He pierces the body of Goranwe, and he shatters his spine, and he's paralyzed and killed instantly. After this, he rules not only his country, but all of Gwynedd, and he prospers greatly. Everything returns to the one origin. There is only one source. There is only one spirit. Goranwe tries to influence Lu with the only thing that he knows is valuable, land and riches and things like that. But Lu, having a divine perspective, that means nothing to him. He wants things to be fulfilled. He wants things to be neutralized. He knows that the same spear that was turned downward in sexual degeneration down the spine, just as the brides pass back and forth from the heavenly realms to the earthly and back, that same spear has to be the spear that goes back to the spiritual realms. Goranwe represents the earth, and he resists to the last breath that he has, and he even will say, well, it was a woman's fault. It's always the woman's fault. She did it. She tempted us, and he won't take responsibility. He even tries to elude and say, well, one person is as good as another. That's a funny kind of altruism that he manifests. So Lu pierces the stone. In the light that we're looking at, it probably means that the regenerative sacrifice is complete. It's so thorough that it goes right down to the core of every material atom. Everything is redeemed. The mineral is, right to the very frontier of the unknown. This is the end of the line. Every last atom is pierced and it is redeemed. It's been taken as far as it can go, and the Spirit has proved itself. But it also leaves us at the end of this very, very long journey with a beautiful image that has manifold meanings. The pierced stone is like a millstone, with its shaft in the center, as in the stone of destiny, the mill of destiny. The mills of God grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine, right down to every last little atom. It's like the millstone of destiny that is the zodiac. The wheel of destiny that for a while is errant and gets off kilter by the processional spindle being turned off, and now it's rectified. It's like the stone of a galaxy pierced by a spear. It's like we have this galactic disc pierced by a spear of knowing. And it's at the opposite end of Arthur. Arthur, to become king and a man of action, pulls a sword or a spear from a stone. Now that spear is returned to the heart of creativity. It penetrates to where the spirit is so densely spiritual, it is like stone. So this is a matter of galactic or of universal proportion. And so, the four Mabinogi begin and end with stories of a singularity. One stroke, and one stroke does it all. Next year, we're going to do talks on mysticism and Shakespeare. If you want to read ahead, we're going to do A Winter's Tale. Not quite. I got it in under 2 hours. Just barely. I'm sure everybody has a question that demands a 15-minute response. Thank you guys very, very much. No, don't break up the vibrations. The clapping breaks up the vibrations. I live as much on inspiration as I do on food. Only I get fat from the food. And if I didn't have you guys to share with, my life would be awfully, awfully dismal. And I just am so thankful for all of this.